what we are invited to laugh at or cheer for tells something about the moral imagination of a society. So when Aboriginal people, Black people, migrants, any racialized community becomes a punchline, we need to understand that it's no longer humor. It becomes an object of ridicule, disgust, and suspicion. We are represented. We are represented. We are represented. Welcome to Represented, the podcast. I'm Aniki Shuru, racial equity coach for online business owners who want to be intentionally inclusive by building a business that is racially equitable. I created this podcast to normalize a conversation around racial inclusion so that fear is no longer the barrier that gets in the way of doing this work. This isn't about perfection, it's about progress. Whether you're taking your first steps or you're well-versed in the journey towards racial equity, this space is for you. So welcome home, friend. Let's get started. From coast to coast, around the globe, we are represented. Hey, welcome back to another episode of Represented Podcast. Thank you so much for being here. So today we're talking about the thin line, and it is a thin line between humor and harm. More specifically, I want to talk about what happens when racism is packaged as comedy, defended as satire, and then dismissed as people being too sensitive when it is called out as dehumanization of the supposed comedy. This episode has been prompted by a news article that came up in my feed recently. I initially thought, this really can't be true, and so proceeded to read. This is a story that unfolded here in Australia, involving a comedian by the name of Lisa Jane Spencer. She created a video where she depicted herself. Now, she's a white woman, by the way. She depicted herself as an Aboriginal woman whilst performing acts ridiculing Aboriginal people. She defended the video as satire, but it was widely criticized as being racist. Now, what's coming up for me, and it has come up many times before. In fact, I've created a whole masterclass on the subject matter of digital blackface and cultural appropriation, which is a little bit different to what I'll be talking about today, but very, very much related. And I will share a link to that if you, after listening to this and you're like, I want to dig deeper into this, I'll share a link in the show notes. What's coming up for me is, when does comedy stop being humor and start becoming harm? When does pushing the envelope become punching down? Satire become racial mockery? And what kind of society are we creating when racial humiliation becomes entertainment? That's where I want this conversation to go today. In this particular situation, action was taken. The comedian lost her job. SBS, a broadcaster here in Australia, distanced itself from the video after its branding appeared in the skit. First Nations advocates condemned it, and there was a massive public outcry. That's really significant in the work of anti-racism, because racism often relies on people staying quiet. And you might relate to some of these characteristics, because when I speak to my students, some of these things come up. So racism often relies on people staying quiet, people laughing along, even though you're so uncomfortable, but you're laughing along, looking away, or just saying, oh, it was just a joke. Public outcry does not undo the harm. We know that. But it does interrupt the normalization of racist rhetoric. When enough people unite and say this is not acceptable, appropriate action ensues because accountability is key. When racism is made public, the response also needs to be public. If harm is normalized in public, then accountability needs to be visible too. I think that is something we need to understand, especially in a climate where people often confuse accountability with censorship. Being challenged is not censorship. Being criticized is not censorship. Facing consequences for racist content is not the same thing as being silenced. It means communities and organizations have the right to respond. That's not the death of free speech. It is the presence of conscience because comedy has always had social power. A joke can travel much, much faster than a lecture. It can lower people's defenses, expose hypocrisy, challenge authority, make powerful people uncomfortable. And at the same time, because of the power of comedy, it can help communities survive grief, pressure, and injustice. It can give people a way to name what feels too hard to say directly. And when comedy is done really well, it can bring people together. Now, I don't want a world where comedy has to be so sanitized that it loses its power. That's not what we're talking about here. Please understand. We're talking about the use of racial stereotypes as comedic material. And if we look back, we'll realize that there's been a long history where entertainment has been used to teach people who to laugh at, fear, mock, and who to see as less than fully human. When we look at the history of blackface minstrelsy, for example, we see very clearly that racist entertainment was never simply entertainment. Blackface minstrel shows became popular in the United States in the late 1800s and continued to influence culture well into the 20th century. White performers, now, if you're not familiar, white performers would darken their skin like black, like shoe polish black, and perform caricatures of black people. They exaggerated speech, movement, intelligence, sexuality, and behavior. They presented black people as lazy, foolish, dangerous, uncivilized, or laughable. And people came to watch. They came to be entertained. They came to laugh. But what were they laughing at? They were not only laughing at a character on stage, they were being taught a story about blackness, being trained in contempt. And that right there is the danger of racist humor. It does not end when the joke ends. It travels into the imagination and shapes assumptions. It tells the audience over and over again that certain people are acceptable targets for humiliation. And once that idea becomes normal, it does not remain in theaters or on screens. It moves into classrooms, workplaces, courtrooms, media, churches, playgrounds, policies, the dinner tables, and everyday interactions. This is why I keep saying historical context cannot be ignored. When people say it was just a joke, they often speak as though the joke exists in isolation, but racist jokes do not come out of nowhere. They pull from histories, stereotypes, images, and assumptions that already exist. That is what makes them recognizable to the audience. The joke lands because people already know the stereotype well. We can also look at film history, the birth of a nation. I don't know if you know of that film. It was released in 1915 and is often spoken about in film history because of its technical influence, but it is one of the most racist films ever made. The film glorified the Ku Klux Klan and portrayed Black people as dangerous, immoral, and unfit for freedom. It didn't just reflect racism, it helped give racism a visual language, turned white fear into spectacle, and presented racist violence as heroic. Again, this was entertainment. People watched it as entertainment. But entertainment plays such a powerful role in how stories, images, and laughter shapes people. What we are invited to laugh at or cheer for tells something about the moral imagination of a society. So when Aboriginal people, Black people, migrants, any racialized community becomes a punchline, we need to understand that it's no longer humor. It becomes an object of ridicule, disgust, and suspicion. Once we see that clearly, the phrase just a joke becomes deeply inadequate because a joke can still do harm. It can still reinforce racism. It can make a room feel unsafe and teach people what they're allowed to say when they think nobody will challenge them. This is particularly important when it comes to how we are bringing up the next generation, because what we normalize now and goes unaccounted for becomes the norm. This is where conscience really plays a key role. It requires us to consider who is being harmed, mocked, misrepresented, and who is carrying the cost of someone else's joke. And I know some people will say, well, where does it end? Are we not allowed to joke about anything anymore? But I think that's the wrong question. Perhaps what we should be asking is, what kind of comedy are we defending? Are we defending comedy that challenges power or comedy that protects power? That's the difference. And that's why I don't believe comedy and conscience are enemies. The more I think about it, the more I'm convinced that comedy needs conscience. It requires comedy to be more thoughtful and discerning. Let me end by saying this. Comedy done well can unite us. It can open up a room, soften hearts, tell the truth in a way that reaches people other forms of communication cannot quite reach. It can help us survive hard things, see ourselves a little bit more clearly, and help us find connection. But comedy that unites us doesn't need marginalized people to become the punchline. It doesn't need Aboriginal, Black, people of color, or any racialized community to absorb harm so everyone else can enjoy the joke. It does not turn someone's history, pain, culture, or stereotype into a prop or see a straight conscience for entertainment. That, I feel, is actually where conscience begins, and that's a conversation worth having. If this conversation has made you think more deeply about the way racism can show up in everyday culture, in humor, in media, and in the things we sometimes laugh off as harmless, then this is the kind of work we continue inside Represented. Represented is my 10-week group program for online business owners who want to build racially inclusive businesses with more depth, courage, and integrity. It's for the coach, the course creator, or membership host who knows inclusion cannot simply sit on a website. It has to shape the way you lead, communicate, create content, hold space, and respond to the world around you. If you love support, structure, and community as you grow into this work, I'd love to invite you to join the waitlist for the next round of Represented. Head over to anigishuru.com/represented for all the details. That link is in the show notes. All you need to do is add your name to be the first to hear when doors open.
We are represented. We are represented. We are represented.
Thank you so much for tuning in. Why don't you go ahead and hit that subscribe button and leave a review so this podcast can reach more online business owners, and together we can begin to normalize racial inclusion in the online coaching space. I'd love to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land where this podcast episode was recorded, the Wiradjuri people in central New South Wales, Australia. Music produced in Nairobi, Kenya by Patrick St. P. Mbaru and Kambua Mathu. Vocals by Joanne Matata.
Represented from coast to coast.